Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's presentation on close reading. So today, what we're going to be doing is looking at, in a little bit of detail, as to what close reading is and how we do it. It's a useful skill. You use it to make more detailed notes of what it is you are reading, and it also helps you to understand the second and third layers of meaning that can be found within a text. So first of all, let's define it. What is close reading? Well, close reading is a careful and purposeful reading of a text. And what it does is it allows us to read more slowly and to more carefully and in a more detailed way interpret difficult passages. It allows us to stay focused on the reading, and it allows us to leave our thinking on the page so that when we come back to it later on, we can see exactly what we ourselves have written and we can understand what the writer has written, and it allows us to better prepare for writing a paper or having a discussion on a text in class. Close reading is essentially an interaction with the text, and it is a multi-step process that involves reading the text in sum. Whenever you do close reading, you always have to annotate the text. And basically, what that means is that you write down critical and explanatory notes on the text. In other words, annotating is a way of having a conversation with the text in the margins of the page. Now, when this is described, this is a little bit difficult to understand, but what it actually looks like is something like this. Here you can see three different examples of close reading carried out on a text. You can see that there is the central text in the middle, and then around the edges of the text there are a large amount of notes or annotations, which allow whoever carried out these close readings to get a much deeper understanding of the text. However, as you can see, everyone carries out a close reading in a different way, and indeed there is no set right or wrong way of doing a close reading. Rather, there are just guidelines which are followed to a greater or lesser extent by whoever is doing the close reading. At the end of the day, the close reading is designed to help us, the reader. It is not something which can be marked or assessed by a third person, and as such it differs vastly from person to person. This is not what close reading looks like. It requires a high amount of concentration, and there is no way of putting it off. It does not involve everything being absolutely silent. It does not involve reading the same text over and over again without purpose, okay? It does not involve lying back in your bed and gently reading your book. Close reading is a focused activity, and as such requires your absolute attention while you are carrying it out. So, let's have a look at it in more detail. Close reading essentially requires that we go through a number of steps with each text that we look at. And the steps are as follows. You can see them also on the screen. Number one, we number the paragraphs. This simply allows us to make it easy to refer back to that paragraph at a later point in time. Step 2. We chunk the text. Now, you could argue that a paragraph is already a chunk, but actually chunking the text allows us to break it up into more easily manageable parts. Scenes could act as one chunk. Various actions that take place in the text act as one chunk. Essentially, what you have to do is look through the text and see how can we block the text together? How can we lump it into big, manageable chunks which can be dealt with on an individual level? Step 3. Underline, circle, or highlight with a purpose. Now, this is important. There have been many times when I personally have seen students who are underlining a text and they simply block out entire areas of the text. This is pointless. When you underline or circle or highlight, you have to make a reference to what it is you have underlined in the margin. That is what the notes are for. So, when you underline, you need a purpose. Are you looking for figurative language? Are you looking for symbolism? Are you looking for specific quotes? Or are you looking at certain scenes which are perhaps setting the theme or the mood or the tone of the text? There has to be a purpose to anything that is highlighted or underlined in a text. Then, in the left-hand margin, make notes. Your notes should refer not only to what you have underlined in the text, but also to the chunk in general. Essentially, in the left-hand margin, you make a note of what the author is saying. Basically, you write a short summary of that specific chunk. This allows you to look back on it again and have a better understanding of what it is the writer has said. Following that, in the right-hand margin, you dig deeper into the text and describe what the author is doing. And this would be where you would include your notes on all the areas you have underlined, an explanation of any figurative language, any imagery, any symbolism, the mood or the tone of the text, or indeed any allusions that the writer is making. All of these notes would go in the right-hand margin. So, these are the steps. I'll go over them one more time. Number the paragraphs, chunk the text, underline with a purpose. In the left-hand margin, you make notes on what the author is saying, and in the right-hand margin, you make notes on what the author is doing. So, let's look at it in more detail. In the first step, just read through the text and simply number the paragraphs. This will allow you to get a feel for the text, and it will also allow you to read through it briefly and get a brief understanding of what is happening. This will also let you be able to refer back to the text in the future if you need to refer to a specific area of it. Step 2. Chunk the text. Chunking essentially means breaking the text up into smaller sections which allow for it to be easier to understand. 2 or 3 paragraphs could come together to make one chunk. And in the example on screen, you can see that while there are 10 paragraphs in the whole text, it actually just breaks down into 2 separate chunks. The chunks allow us to carry out the analysis on a more specific level, and it makes the text easier to manage and easier to understand. 3. Underline with a purpose. You may be looking for various different things within the text, but as a rule of thumb, for an informative article, look for claims the author is making and the evidence he or she has used to support those claims. For poetry, and indeed other forms of literature, look for figurative language and imagery, and what they serve to the text as a whole. Whenever you approach a text, approach it with a purpose in mind, and this purpose should drive whatever it is you are highlighting or underlining in the text. Whenever you highlight or underline, always highlight the following. Highlight any claims that the author is making. Highlight any big ideas and any key details. And if there are any words which you can't figure out using context clues, then circle them so that you can come back to them later and identify what they mean. Step 4. In the left-hand margin, essentially you summarize each chunk. You're trying to identify what has the author said, or what is he or she saying. And your summaries should be short, sweet, clear, and specific. They should briefly outline what has been said in that chunk without going into too many details. And finally, in the 5th step, you try to identify what is the author doing. Once you have understood what he is saying, try to identify what the author is doing. Is he arguing, comparing, describing, or blaming? Try and ask questions in the margin. And in fact, you could even represent info with pictures. Write short little explanations of any literary techniques that have been used in the text. Why have they been used, and what purpose do they serve to the text as a whole? So in summary, in the right-hand side, try to identify what the author is doing. So this concludes our video on close reading. I hope you find it informative, and I look forward to you following my next video.